Well, SeanLennon here. We are glad to be back here, grateful to be here back at MBJ Studios for 2021, the new year. It's been a while since we've been back, so this is the next edition of the Fight Report, the first edition of 2021. And for today, we're going to focus on the 2020 end of the year recap. Of course, UFC comes back next Saturday night. Make sure to check it out at UFC Fight Night, UFC Fight Island 7. Holloway versus Holloway. Max Holloway is going to be in the main event against Calvin in the featherweight division. World premiere is going to be on ABC. That's right, first time ever. It'll be on ABC as well as ESPN Plus, and obviously Fight Island will continue after that with another big main event, UFC 257, a mega card featuring Conor McGregor versus Dustin Poirier, and in the co-main event, we're going to see Michael Chandler versus Dan Hooker, 155-pound division as well. Then we head over to UFC Vegas, UFC Fight Island 8, and that's going to be Neil Magny against Michael Chiesa in the main event as well. And we'll have an interview exclusive of Neil Magny coming up shortly this week before his big fight. But yeah, right now what we're going to do is a 2020 end of the year recap, and we're going to go look back at the Fightlete staff. They made their selections for Fight of the Year and Finish of the Year, and we'll go through and talk about what they had, why they had these fights, if I agree with them personally, and I'll also give my picks for Fight of the Year and Finish of the Year. So we start off with Fight of the Year, Zhang Weili versus Joanna Jędrzejczyk for the women's strawweight title, and this is selected by Fightlete.com staff writer Drew Pierce. I would agree with him. This was a hell of a fight. I mean, all 5 rounds, both these women were going at it. It was a razor thin, close fight. Joanna Jędrzejczyk, the fact that she took that damage and her head was just swollen, actually a hematoma that was growing. She looked completely unrecognizable. But both these women showed that they had the desire to get in there. Joanna seemed like Joanna champion once again. Able to come out winning rounds. I think this went to the 5th round. Zhang Weili won this fight. Obviously, coming from the People's Republic of China, she is a proud, member of her country. But also, when we look at what she's done in such a short time, just pure dominance. This fight was close, however, and Zhang Weili, who fought Jessica Andrade to win that title back in 2019. This was her first title defense. We still not have seen Zhang Weili. Obviously, with the pandemic, things are hard, and she's obviously where the heart of the pandemic has originated from. So we have not seen her back in action. We do know that she'll be defending her title against Thug Rose Namajunas in the future, which we can't wait for that fight. So hopefully that's booked in 2021. But we look back at this fight. Amazing fight. I've watched it twice just to see these two women just go at it. It was like a blitzkrieg throughout. The amount of damage, and Joanna Jędrzejczyk very sneaky with her strikes, just able to capitalize, get inside, get out. But Zhang Weili, she has done what very few women have done in this strawweight division, and that is take on now 2 former champions, right? Zhang Weili took out Jessica Andrade. Now she takes on Joanna Jędrzejczyk, 2 champions in a row, knocked out. I think she's looking to take on her 3rd former strawweight champion. She's looking to clean this division out pretty quickly. You could say she could step up to 125 to take on Shevchenko, but definitely an agreement that this is one of the best fights of the year. You have to check this one out. Big fight and and guess what? It was like better than the main event. When you go back and you look at it, because the main event was a snoozer between Yoel Romero taking on the champion Israel Adesanya, and it just felt like that fight didn't deliver. This one over delivered in that regard, and I feel like it was one of the best fights of the year. So obviously I'm in agreement with that with Drew. That was right before the COVID pandemic hit. This was right at UFC 253. Back in March of 2019, and again a big main event. A co-main event that outdid the main event. That's what I'm saying. It's just very technical striking. As Drew said, the pair exchanged huge shots. Everybody was on their feet. And I feel like the fans were so much into this fight as well. And this was the last event with UFC fans, so how fitting would that be? Of course, the next fight we're going to go over that is part of the best of 2020 is Josh Emmett versus Shane Burgos. This is from staff writer Michael Donius. He talks about this fight and why he thought this fight was good is because basically these guys brought it for all 3 rounds. It was a fight that, saw a lot of action. They very well were able to go at each other, striking. Obviously, the injury, ACL tear that Emmett suffered throughout the fight, and for him to keep going despite that injury, just had a dogfight, as he says. The unlimited pressure and pace of Burgos was not he was able to stay away from that, not let that affect him. And, obviously the endurance, the big power shots that landed by Emmett were enough to win this fight. But yeah, just the fact that he had that ACL tear 15 seconds into the fight and continued it, that was a good fight as well. Then we got Kieran. His pick was Shayna Dobson versus Maria Agapova. And this is actually for finish of the year as well. So we're going to mention it for finish of the year. But for fight of the year, my prediction for fight of the year was, of course, Dustin Poirier versus Dan Hooker. Thought that was a great main event. When we look back at the UFC, obviously they brought great fights. Despite not having the fans, despite there being a worldwide pandemic, and they were still able to bring great talent from overseas. And Dan Hooker was one of those guys. He was one of the top guys the UFC were talking about for quite some time. One of those guys that was going to get in there and possibly be a contender at 155 pounds. Obviously, and you know what? He was so close to doing it. But at the end of the day, UFC Fight Night, Poirier versus Hooker, Dustin Poirier showed he is there for a reason. And that's why he's going to be main eventing. This was his last fight before this next one against Conor McGregor at UFC 257. And these two just went to war back in June. UFC Vegas 4. I thought Dan Hooker early on had this fight. He just was pouring the pace relentlessly. Dustin Poirier managed to start counting strikes. Both guys were bloodied up, bruised. I mean, this was just a fan's delight. If you're a striking fan, if you like, great boxing in the mixed martial arts world, this is the fight for you. I felt they put on a superb performance. And, I personally think this is my favorite over Zhang Weili and Joanna on JJ, but I think they're all equally great fights. And, this is my pick for fight of the year, just because Dustin Poirier has gained the biggest opportunity coming off of this fight. He's going to fight Conor McGregor again in the rematch. And I think McGregor was even impressed with what he did with Dan Hooker. And that's partially why they're going to be fighting. McGregor had to be impressed. And McGregor has not fought since the pandemic. That's another factor. And the fact that Dan Hooker is still going to be competing in the lightweight division against welcoming Michael Chandler to the division in the co-main event as well. So both of these guys are the main event and co-main event, respectively, of UFC 257 coming up. And he can't wait to get back in there after losing to Dustin Poirier. Both guys were unrecognizable in their face. They both overwhelming none of the shots they absorbed and just kept it going. Clinching wise with Dan Hooker, gaining there and doing a lot of great damage, and Dustin Poirier just putting everything together. Very crisp striking, very intelligent and direct, and they're both powerful guys, and I'll give it to both of them. Both these guys, you hear that chant at wrestling events? Well, both these guys, Dustin and Dan, they deserve fight of the year. It's not like I'm giving one guy the award. They both had a tremendous amount that went into that fight, and I feel like that was the best one. So then we go on, and we're going to look at the finish of the year. We have a few ones. Next is Shayna Dobson versus Maria Agapova, as I mentioned before. TKO, second round, UFC Vegas. Kieran from Fightlete.com said this was one of the finishes of the year, and I agree because that Shayna Dobson is also the underdog fight of the year. Shayna Dobson was not favored to win this fight. Maria Agapova came in there, and unfortunately for her, she got finished in the second round. Not it was a fight that, many people did not see. Maria Agapova had just come off, several big finishes. Her first fight in UFC was a big finish. That, obviously there's sometimes you overlook her opponent. And Shayna Dobson needed this fight, Agapova was a minus 1900 favorite in betting odds, and 9-2. And, after her first win, she did call out Shayna Dobson, and it was on August 22nd, UFC Fight Night in Las Vegas. And obviously, in the second round, she was gassed. Agapova lost her position, and Dobson took several shots to her head before the referee was able to call it. The Dobson got this win, and I just think that the whole underdog story makes it one of the best finishes of the year as well. So that is definitely a notable finish from Kieran from Fightlete.com, our staff writer, and that happened at UFC Vegas 7. AJ McKee defeated Darren Caldwell by submission, first round, and that was Bellator 253. Amazing choke right there. I think this is definitely think that this is one of the best finishes of the year as well. When you look at basically how it happened, Karrion Caldwell was able to get McKee to the ground for a short time, but just that thing is all he accomplished. McKee created opportunity to lock his arms around Caldwell's left shoulder and neck, and it's an unorthodox technique, and it paid off into that submission. Great submission, and I feel like, moving forward, AJ McKee is probably going to be one of the guys to look at. He is my top pick in Bellator, probably one of my favorite fighters in Bellator right now, and this submission just shows you why. Jimmy Flick defeated Cody Durden. According to Drew Pierce, this is his submission of the year. Actually, the previous one was Chris Murphy, and obviously this fight, knowing Jimmy Flick and knowing what he did in his previous fight, like, this guy is amazing. He's just one of those fighters that, goes in there and he's got great wrestling. He's got great jiu-jitsu, and the 125-pound division is flourishing right now. And what better way for him to come in there and getting that done at the last event of the year, UFC Vegas 17, and he choked him out. It was almost like a flying triangle choke, because if you saw what happened in the fight, it's like he just went right into it. He jumped. And it was like Cody Durden threw like a knee, and then he jumped right in there. He jumped right on top of him. He locked his feet up midair, brought him down, synced in that triangle choke, and that was it. His second submission, of course. The first one was at the Contender Series, and wow. I mean, Jimmy Flick is a submission wizard. And it was a fight that he necessarily wasn't winning. Like, the first round was I would say Cody Durden was beating him. But yeah, Jimmy Flick came back up, and what a huge win. Just the way he puts it together, and if you're watching slow motion, it's really special. KhabibNurmagomedov defeated Justin Gaethje by submission, triangle choke. Obviously, Khabib is the GOAT. He's now number one pound for pound ranked in the UFC. And this comes from Michael Donius of Fightlete.com from the main event of UFC 254. And what I have to say about this fight is Khabib Nurmagomedov just shows he is a technical master. Very dominant. Justin Gaethje didn't really have a chance to do anything in this fight. And then the way that he was able to just, transition to his back, which is very risky, get that triangle choke locked in, transition to his back, and make him tap out was amazing. And Justin Gaethje, again, a tough guy that knows grappling very well, has been in those situations before, but Khabib Nurmagomedov just takes it to another level. And I feel like not only is he very quick and adept, that when that submission is locked in, there is no other choice but to tap out. And that's why Khabib Nurmagomedov is the GOAT. And this is one of the finishes of the year. Another one we had talked about was Daniel Rodriguez defeats Tim Means by submission, a standing guillotine choke. And that was UFC on ESPN 25, according to Kieran. And what he had to say about that fight was, in his article, was that it was at UFC 167 in New Mexico. And Rodriguez was managing to take down so impressive that it didn't seem much of a fight at all. And then a few blows landed to Tim Means' head and pushed him in defense. but Means tried to gather himself by grappling Rodriguez's leg. Rodriguez is quickly countered with a chokehold, and that was it. And big win for Daniel Rodriguez as well. And, obviously, KhabibNurmagomedov, when we were talking about that fight, Khabib cried in the octagon, honoring his father and coach who passed away earlier that year, left his gloves in the cage, announced his retirement from the sport, 29-0. And the impressiveness of the choke, parlayed with the stakes at the moment, made this submission of the year, according to Michael Downey. Yes, and why? Obviously, this is going to be one of the best fights of the year as well. Then we go to other finishes of the year, and my personal finish of the year was, of course, Joaquin Buckley defeated Impa Kasanganay by a jumping, spinning back kick in the second round. UFC Fight Island 5, and this knockout was huge for many different reasons. Just the viral of it and how it went so far, and it was the most viewed video of all time for the UFC in their library. And, just the praise that it gotten. Joaquin Buckley, again, with a huge jumping, spinning back kick. Like, it was like his first, one of his legs were caught, and then all of a sudden, in midair, able to go ahead and perform this highlight reel knockout. Amazing. And this puts this kid on the map. He is impressive so far. He has a bright future. He just won his last fight as well. And Joaquin Buckley is going to be one of those guys we're going to see on the UFC spotlight. We're going to see him on the main card moving forward. I think he's going to be another guy that we're not only going to see, what else he has to... we're always going to remember this, but we know that I think there's a lot more to him than just this highlight reel kick. And again, he beat Jordan Hook by 18 seconds in the second round. But yeah, the jumping, spinning back kick, something that we've never seen. And I'm sure it's going to inspire the next generation of mixed martial artists to come up with even something crazier than that. But how can you? Because it's literally, he's in midair. You catch his leg, the other leg comes, and he's literally suspended in midair. And he turns his body around to free that leg, and a back kick just hits you right in the face. To me, it was like that. It was like that front kick that Anderson Silva pulled off against Vitor Belfort a long time ago. It's just so automatic, so quick, so precise, and it's a fight-ending knockout. Love seeing that. And of course, Joaquin Buckley will be against Alessio Di Chirico coming up January 16th on UFC Fight Night as well. This Saturday, UFC Fight Island 7. So next up, we're going to talk about is some notable finishes, right? So I also, maybe this was not knockout of the night, but knockout of the year, but these were still notable knockouts. Like, they were almost right there. So 3 of those fights are Cody Garbrandt versus Rafael Assunção with that right hook. He loaded up and just finished Assunção. And for Cody Garbrandt, with his back against the wall, with the 3 losses, possibly facing 4 losses in a row, that also combined that he was looking to get back to being no love, being where he was as the bantamweight champion, and of course in the future he'll be taking on the flyweight champion in the UFC. We don't know if that fight's going to happen because obviously Davidson Figueroa just had that amazing fight with Brandon Moreno. They may run it back, but you got to believe that Cody Garbrandt, once he gets that opportunity against Davidson Figueroa, it's going to be an amazing fight. But yeah, Cody Garbrandt getting that done at UFC 250. He hadn't fought in quite some time. I think it was like March of 2019. So just all that time off, and those 3 straight losses that affected him, they were all finishes. Very frustrating for him, I'm sure. Able to get out that frustration, get a huge knockout finish against a veteran like Assunção. Kevin Holland defeated Jacare Souza, and this was a different kind of knockout. It was punches from the scramble. So basically, Jacare had took Kevin Holland down. Kevin Holland was kind of like coming up from his back, and boom, from his back, able to knock out Jacare. This was something we've very rarely seen before, and just shows you really Kevin Holland's precise and athleticism. Just to kind of like the way he moved his legs, even when he was on the ground, scissor his legs, and then get that full force. That you can never generate that kind of power off your back. Usually punches off your back is a desperate attempt, but this one connected, and the fact that Jacare Souza, such a legendary performer in the UFC, a legendary fighter, a big win for Kevin Holland, who has had a big 2020, by the way, as well. So I would say that this is definitely one of the most notable knockouts in the UFC in 2020. The last one is Corey Sandhagen defeats Marlon Moraes by knockout. This was a wheel kick from UFC Fight Island 5, and just the way it was precise. A lot of people saw Marlon Moraes winning this fight, and Corey Sandhagen was able to get it done in the first round. Just the precise and just like the all of a suddenness, like wow. Corey Sandhagen is not just a grappler anymore. This guy can strike. This guy can deliver fight-ending finishes, and it was a devastating wheel kick, so that makes my notable list. Some notable submissions, however, are Cyborg defeats Arlen Blanco by submission at Bellator 249, rear naked choke, and I think that the fact that this was Cyborg's first submission victory helps her, in that case as well. I think it was a notable one just because of that, and the fact that she's always growing, even in her age, right? She's a champion. She's willing to, put in the work, put in the time and effort, and gain her very, very first submission victory. Aljamain Sterling defeated Corey Sandhagen by submission, rear naked choke, as well at UFC 250. That was a big one just because Corey Sandhagen's so well versed on the ground, and for Aljamain Sterling just to lock that up, one of the biggest submissions of the wins. And then we have to think about Ariane, and Aljamain Sterling moves on to take on Peter Yan, of course, at UFC 258 in March. So that's going to be another notable fight, and can't wait for that one. Actually, that's in February. Aljamain Sterling versus Corey Sandhagen. Ariane Lipinski takes on Luna Carolina, and that was a knee bar, a 6 submission victory at UFC Fight Island 2. And just the way that she was able to use both her legs, locking, kind of like locking both legs of her opponent, and then just pulling up with that straight up knee bar. A move that's very rarely used in UFC. So those were all notable victories, all notable submissions as well.
My name is Motaz Oscar, and shout out to the Fightlete Report.
All right, SeanLennon here, back on Fightlete Report. And we're going to next go over the biggest news stories of 2020 and talk about why 2020 in particular had some amazing things that happened in the sport of MMA despite the international pandemic, the national, obviously what's happening in the world right now. And, obviously there was still big things, signings and stuff, so we'll take ahead and take a quick peek and look at it. So some of the biggest news stories is the pandemic forced UFC to have no fans for the first time on UFC Plus 28, ESPN Plus 28 with Lee versus Oliveira. The decision was made not to have fans happening at the event. It was already set up. The tickets were sold. The arena was already set up for the event, so they had it. And it was the very first UFC event with no fans in the history of UFC. Like something in particular we thought we'd never see. And at the time, the NBA announced that they were suspending their season. Major League Baseball said the same thing. Hockey did the same thing as well. So it was just a crazy time. And so UFC still would manage to pull off this event. And they would postpone all their upcoming events. And not until May 9th they would return. So it was from March 13th to May 9th. And they would have UFC 249. UFC kind of led the way with making sure during an pandemic, events were safe. All the necessary precautions that needed were taken, including COVID-19 tests for fighters, for cornersmen, for the media and staff. All needed to take COVID-19 tests. UFC had covered the cost of that as well. They also had the thing that was different where they would have production trucks, one production truck for the whole event. They would move the production from the hotel to the arena. Well, this time they had to have 2 separate trucks. They did not want the staff from the arena going to the staff at the hotel. So, everything remained separate. It was just kind of interesting to see all the intricacies, how they made things differently. Fighters were wearing masks at the weigh-ins. And that was their first of, 3 events that they did that week. Before going back to UFC, Apex and the Performance Institute UFC Apex was where they would hold the events when they were in the U.S. Of course, the next big thing was UFC Fight Island. And UFC Fight Island was a huge deal. Dana White said that basically his roster would be going through one another, right? Because the fact that if he held just events in the USA, they wouldn't have enough fresh fights after time. So he knew he would also have to make fights for the fighters overseas. And enter in Yas Island and Abu Dhabi. And what Dana White did was made sure that the events were safe. He made sure that they actually had a part of the island that the fighters could kind of roam around in, and that international fights would happen as well. So when UFC went to Fight Island, that was a big deal. That was the very first time that they were there, and they were having fighters overseas. They had Jose Aldo, Peter Yan. They had, of course, the main event between George Masvidal and Kamaru Usman. Obviously, it was supposed to be Gilbert Burns, and that fight fell through. So I think that in a myriad of events that happened, of what we got an idea of that UFC is so resilient that they could still manage to make fights happen, and even if their fighters were overseas, no matter where they're located in the world, they could have the power to bring them in to a safe place, which was now Fight Island. Of course, the rumors went crazy, and people thought they were going to be fighting on the beach, and and all sorts of things. How it would work, and the media, obviously, was a huge deal as well. Playing part of it. The mainstream media got a hold of what they were doing, and obviously, this is a thing that moving forward, UFC, they set the standard of what they needed to do to be safe during this time in COVID-19. And since then, we've seen professional boxing, basketball, baseball, football, hockey, all make their returns post-pandemic. But UFC was the very first one, and I believe that's why, when we go back and we look at UFC and basically what they did on Fight Island, and basically not only what they did, but kind of how they influence other events to do the same, it's just a big deal. I just feel like that they were able to just go in there and get this opportunity for the island, and it was all the way when we looked at it, it was all the way back in in July that they were able to be on there. It's a huge deal. They went back to they went there originally in July. On July 7th was their first event, and then they went back there in the fall as well for 3 or 4 events. So the fact that UFC could produce really great fights and also keep it safe for the fighters and the staff was a very big deal. And it was basically UFC 251, which was on July 11th. That was their very first fight there. Then followed by Kattar versus Ige in the UFC Fight Night, which was that Wednesday. Figueroa versus Benavidez 2. And Whitaker versus Till. So that was 4 big events they were able to do. They would come back in September of that year and put on another big showing, including 3 major events with Adesanya versus Costa, Alde versus Aldana, Holm versus Aldana, Moraes versus Sanhagen, Ortega versus Zombie, and Khabib versus Gaethje on October 24th. Be able to start and end with a pay-per-view for 1 whole month. And that was a big deal as well. And in Abu Dhabi and Yas Island, there will be fans that will be allowed for when UFC Fight Island comes back. And of course, that's with UFC 257. Actually, it starts this Saturday on January 16th with Holloway versus Kattar, Chiesa versus Magny, and UFC 257 Poirier versus McGregor 2, all taking place on Fight Island. And I think it's also notable to think that UFC can go back to Fight Island. Like, they have an arena there called that's a brand new arena. They can hold events there anytime they want to. That this is going to be the destination. I think the whole theme of Fight Island, this will be a vacation destination moving forward for many UFC fans after the global pandemic hopefully has subsided. And that's a big news as well. So I really think that UFC Fight Island is one of the biggest stories that come out of UFC 220 in 2020, in the year 2020. Of course, other news was Conor McGregor originally announcing his retirement from the sport of UFC, of MMA, and we thought that this would be it. Obviously, he's coming back. But at the time, we thought maybe that would be it because the fact that, he has enough money to substantiate himself. And not only that, just because, what else could he do? Obviously he's fought like KhabibNurmagomedov, who was the lightweight champion. He had the big win against Donald Cerrone. And, there was this period where we didn't know if he would come back. And if he felt safe enough during the pandemic to come back and fight. So if he did retire, it would have made perfect sense. But, of course, McGregor is back. But whenever he announced those retirement announcements, they make waves on the internet. So that's obviously part of the reason why he does it. UFC signs Michael Chandler to the lightweight division, who is the UFC 254 potential replacement. So either Khabib Nurmagomedov or Justin Gaethje, whoever, if something happened where they get COVID or they would get injured, Michael Chandler would step in. He's the former Bellator lightweight champion, three-time Bellator lightweight champion. Obviously, didn't get an opportunity to fight in 2020, but 2021, that'll be at UFC 257. He takes on Dan Hooker in the co-main event. UFC middleweight champion, the legend Anderson the Spider Silva's final UFC fight took place against Uriah Hall at UFC Vegas 12. He lost by TKO, but Anderson Silva is a legend of the sport of mixed martial arts. And if he does come back or he doesn't, this is his final fight in UFC. Huge story, of course, because, Anderson Silva has done so much. Even though his career kind of, didn't go the way he had planned. He was never the same after that big leg injury to Chris Weidman. The fact that he still kept going at it, still trying to put on great performances. I didn't think he lost his touch or his mojo. I think it was just that greater competition comes and it's a time for the legends to fade away. I think that's what we'll see in UFC. But Anderson Silva, man, great career. And, obviously Uriah Hall was very emotional after that fight, after finishing a guy he called his hero as well. So that was a great moment in 2020 for UFC. Now we'll talk about Bellator, and they returned in 2020 for July 24th, Bellator 242. Of course, that was at the Mohegan Suns. No fans were there. They have media that is set up. As you know, I'm able to be part of the media because they do virtual media online. But ever since Bellator 240 in February, this was, their first event back. March 13th, Bellator 241, Pitbull versus Carvalho made headlines because it was canceled the day before. I mean, can you imagine? They had the fighters. The fighters actually weighed in, and then they're told that this is not happening because of the global pandemic. We know a lot more about this, the COVID-19 now than we did then. It was just an argument where why couldn't they have just had the fighters fight with no fans? They just went ahead and canceled the whole event. And it just shows you then, back then, we didn't know what was going on. And they had to take every precaution possible. Of course, Pitbull versus Carvalho would come back later in November for their fight where Pitbull beat Carvalho in the World Featherweight Grand Prix tournament. LFA returned as well during the summer. And Bellator had some big signings in 2020 as well. Anthony Rumble Johnson, a former contender for the UFC light heavyweight title. Corey Anderson, the top guy from the UFC, signed with Bellator. And Yoel Romero, a former #1 contender in the middleweight division, all signed with Bellator MMA as well. And then we can't also forget that in 2020 we found out Paige Van Zandt will be going to Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship. Again, after a tough loss that she had suffered in July, she made the decision to take on to step in the ring in the Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship, and of course she'll be making her debut for that in early 2021 next month as well. So yeah, a lot of great crazy things that happened in 2020. And, a lot of great things happened as well. I mean, it'll be, one of those years that we'll look back and we'll see that, still, without the fans, the UFC was able to deliver some of the greatest performances, some of the greatest fight nights, and there was enjoyable fights. And also, the UFC, Bellator came back as well. We have other promotions that are returning. They are going through the format of the no fans, only on TV, pay TV, You know, and this is what MMA will be behind. But when the fans do come back, I think it'll be that much more special. The weigh-ins will be bigger. The media days will be bigger. And, of course, the cards will be bigger. As we have learned that UFC does plan on holding an event in the Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas, Nevada as well. Well, this is it for SeanLennon, Fightlete Report, Best of 2020. We hope you enjoyed this. Check out Fightlete.com for exclusive MMA interviews. Follow us at Fightlete on Instagram, Twitter as well. Take care, guys.